All right, let's do it. So Harbinger, right, pistol necro, elixirs, cool stuff. Important note for the balance update, Harbinger Shroud is actually something that Scourge does right now, but not anymore. We're renaming that to Sandstorm Shroud, a lot more thematic. And since we now have a character called the Harbinger, it probably makes sense that Harbinger Shroud belongs to the Harbinger. So let's dive in here. There's actually a lot of stuff going on with the Shroud mechanic on the Harbinger, so let's just start going over them. First off, let's see if as long as you are in combat and you have life force, you're going to see that life force is going to be drained over time to heal the Necromancer. So this is going to create kind of like an interesting dynamic in how you're going to play the game, being able to build up enough life force to enter Shroud, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you're avoiding enough damage so that it doesn't actually drain too much of that life force. And I mean, you still get the upside of the heal, but a lot of the time you're going to be wanting to go into that Shroud and get access to those damaging abilities. So it's kind of, right off the bat, kind of an interesting change of pace for this character. And there's a lot more to come. And let's just give myself some more life force here. And first thing we're going to see when we hop into Shroud, we're starting to accumulate this, this mechanic called Blight. And we'll see a little bit more of this on the rest of the spec as well. But building up Blight, you can see on the health orb, we're gaining negative health. This is temporary health, 2% per stack. This stacks up to 25 times, so you can lose up to 50% of your maximum health if you are capped on Blight. And the trade-off there is that some of the traits on this character are going to reward you for accumulating a lot of Blight, and that's going to create kind of this high risk, high reward dynamic for this character, which is more of a glassy DPS character, even more so than Reaper. We're going to see a couple other mechanics with the Shroud that really reinforce that. Looking to make this more of a high DPS, a little more mobility than Necromancer is used to. We'll get to that as we get into the Shroud skills. So Blight, key mechanic, we'll see that in Elixirs as well. The other thing to note about Harbinger Shroud is that life force will not actually protect you. It will not absorb damage while you're in Shroud. You are just going to take full damage from abilities against your health total. So this, again, makes the character a little bit more squishy, but at the same time it also gives you more access to life force because you can't actually be pushed out through damage eating through all your life force. You're going to have access to Shroud as long as you have life force. Obviously you'll be accumulating Blight as that goes on, and you're going to be susceptible to damage. So really big moment of high risk, high reward again, and since you're able to take damage, you're also allowed to be healed. So it's a pretty big disconnect from the typical Shroud we see on Core Necro, we see on Reaper. Kind of similar to Scourge in that sense, where you always kind of have access to incoming healing and at the same time don't have that massive protection from life force. Scourge makes up for it with some barrier. Harbinger just has to deal with it, get some allies to heal you, get some supports, make some support friends, and really be able to capitalize on the upside of Harbinger Shroud. So that kind of creates a few different ways that you can interact with Shroud here, because the longer you stay in Shroud, you're going to be accumulating Blights. You're even more and more susceptible to damage. So sometimes you might want to just pop in, use all your abilities, which we will cover very shortly, but we just show off super high level. Here's some buttons to press. So you might pop in, use all your abilities, pop out, and really minimize the Blight. Then you're giving up some of the sustained pressure from the damaging abilities in Harbinger Shroud, but at the same time you're kind of maximizing your survivability by accumulating less Blight. Or you can have that kind of trade-off where going in with maximum health or maximum life force is going to give you access to potentially 20 seconds of Shroud. This drains at 5% per second. So up to 20 seconds of Shroud where you're going to really have access to a lot of these powerful abilities. And just going to throw something out for all of the theory crafters in the chat real quick. Everyone who has spreadsheets, we should probably compare notes sometime because I'm a big fan of spreadsheets. But for anyone who wants to do some calculations and maybe figure out the power coefficients of all these abilities before getting your hands on it next Tuesday, the character I'm currently on has 2,023 power, as well as about 37% boon duration. So keep that in mind. Legendary pistol, sorry, getting ahead of myself. So keep that in mind. There's your weapon strength. There's your power. Figure out the power coefficient. Everyone out there with spreadsheets, big thumbs up. And so we'll be hovering over tooltips as we go in there. So let's take a look at the actual Shroud skills now. Starting off, we have Tainted Bolts. This is just auto attack. It's a little bit cooler than Vileblast. It's a little bit faster. Typical I guess maybe a little closer to Reaper, which has the nice auto attack chain compared to the very deliberate life blast that Core Necro has access to. So this actually fires 2 different projectiles. So a little bit of extra value from Doomfire, for example, which we've already kind of preemptively reduced the burning duration of Doomfire for the Harbinger specialization because of this kind of dual hit on the auto attack. So a little bit of power damage, a little bit of Torment in there, and all the lovely procs of Shroud Skill 1 that everyone knows and loves. Moving on to Dark Barrage. This is kind of the primary damage. I'm going to have to keep resetting my Shroud over and over and over, but that's fine. This is kind of the primary damage payoff for the kit. This is a high power coefficient, a lot of Torment. This is more of that shotgun style, point blank projectile that we see on stuff like Split Blade. We see it on Fan of Fire. A lot of skills have this kind of value for being closer in range. Because you see, moving back, you're not going to get full all 6 hits on these projectiles, but you still get a little bit of damage. It's going to be optimal to be in melee range, and we're going to see the opportunity to get in melee range with some of the other skills on this kit. Moving on to both Devouring Cut and Voracious Arc. These are both movement abilities. So Reaper gets the 1 dash on skill 2. Harbinger gets a little bit more. We got 2 movement skills in here. That dash is actually really long. That's great. So Devouring Cut, it's more that burning speed, no evade here. We put the evade on Voracious Arc. We don't want to overload that too much. Necro still trying to be a little bit of this squishier character. Don't want to put too many evades in there, but giving it access to a little bit more movement is going to allow you to both get in and set up your Dark Barrage, or kind of disengage and get back into range for your pistol abilities. So Devouring Cut, damage and torment, pretty straightforward. Voracious Arc, this one has the evade. This is the vault animation that we've seen before on Daredevil. This is also going to have a very, very short daze. So this is kind of your main engage tool. This is going to set you up, get a short daze, maybe interrupt something, give you a very short window of opportunity to kind of capitalize on what you're trying to do, really fire off the Dark Barrage. And then finally, we're going to see the big CC, Vital Draw on skill 5. Not uncommon for Necro to have a CC skill on skill 5. We've seen it with Executioner's Scythe on Reaper and Tainted Shackles on Necro, or Core Necro. Vital Draw, probably the most powerful. We have like 3-second float. This also gives you a little bit of life force as well, so that kind of gives you a little bit more time in here if you're hitting maximum number of targets. This is a AoE 3-second float, so really big potential to set up Dark Barrage, set up pistol skills, you know, hit this, Dark Barrage, get out, press skill 2, Weeping Shots. We'll get to that real quick. You have a lot of opportunity to set up both yourself and your teammate with that ability. So there's definitely a lot of power in the Harbinger kit. We're trying to really balance the risk-reward aspect of no health coverage with life force, and also the just increasing blight mechanic, and trying to make sure that the Harbinger Shroud kit is strong enough to really warrant that. And we'll see how that actually ends up playing out once you guys get your hands on this in the beta. So next, let's hop into the pistol kit. This is kind of a ranged, it's kind of like a hybrid DPS weapon. You can play it with either power or condition, or potentially both. Maybe Grieving is a solid stat combination there. Carrion, Rabid, these, maybe not as much Rabid, but Carrion's a solid stat combination there. But looking at Vicious Shot, pretty standard auto attack, 2 bounce. So line up 2 targets, you're going to get a little bit extra value there. Damage, torment, nothing too crazy, but it's an auto attack. We want to make sure it's kind of pretty basic. And moving on to Weeping Shots, the 2 skill. We showed this a little bit off of the Vital Draw. This is kind of this is probably the strongest, or maybe not the strongest, because the 3 skill is also pretty good, but this Weeping Shots does a lot of things. It's going to do damage, vulnerability, torment, life force. This also pierces, so if you line up a good number of targets, you can get a pretty significant amount of AoE damage. This is obviously a little bit harder to do in a competitive setting where the enemies aren't going to stack as cleanly on top of each other for a line projectile, but if you get that perfect line, then you're looking at potentially a lot of life force, a lot of damage. And the life force is only going to be once per bullet. We didn't want to overblow it too much on one skill, so this is only going to be up to 9% if you land all 6 of those shots on any target. Piercing, not going to give you any additional value. It's only the first target strike that gives you life force. But we'll see a bit more life force generation on the rest of the kit as well. Moving on to Vileblast, skill 3. This is another pretty strong skill. The whole kit here on the pistol is quite good. Gives you a little bit more AoE than some of the other Necromancer weapons, looking at Axe and Scepter, for example, they each have like a singular AoE skill, but Pistol has the opportunity to kind of get AoE value out of both 2 and 3, and a little bit on the bouncing projectile with skill 1. So just looking over Vileblast here, this is an AoE stun, short duration stun, 1 second. This is more intended to be like that disruptive value as opposed to the major crowd control setup. That's more what Vital Draw is trying to do out of the Shroud kit. But this is also going to do weakness and poison and some life force generation. So not quite enough to set up the entire combo from Weeping Shots, but if you have quickness, you should be able to get all those shots in there. And we'll actually see a little bit of quickness, and a non-trivial amount of quickness as we move into the elixirs and some of the traits. So maybe that's something that you can pull off more often. So that's Pistol Kit. You know, it's 900 range, pretty standard for these Necromancer Necromancer range weapons. And let's hop into the Elixir skills next. So Elixirs, skill type we've seen before in Engineer. This is, I mean, we're going to see a lot of boons, we're going to see a lot of Blight. And so by putting Blight onto all of these Elixirs, it kind of gives us the ability to push them a bit more above rate in terms of what amount of boons they're going to give, because they're also going to have that downside of negative overall health. So Elixir of Promise, pretty straightforward. It's the heal skill. It just gives you vigor and healing and life force and a little bit of Blight. And then we'll get to a few more exciting skills here. Elixir of Risk, 10 Might Stacks and Fury, more of that offensive option. And then combine that with Elixir of Anguish. This is going to be first source of quickness that we see here. Getting some notes on the, it's a good call, take a drink. Anyone who knows me knows that I can ramble about this game for a very, very long time. So we're definitely going to have a bit of that. Thank you. Anyway, Elixir of Anguish. This is first source of quickness that we're seeing in this kit. Also gives you a little bit of swiftness. Who cares about that? Quickness is the awesome thing here. You know, you run a little bit faster. That's fine. That's fine. Everyone sees quickness, and that's what you want to see here. So, you know, you can pop Elixir of Anguish, Elixir of Risk, that's a lot. Quickness, Might, Fury, big damage potential. We'll see a little bit more coming in from the Elite skill once we get there as well, which is going to be very exciting. Moving on to Elixir of Bliss. This is another life force source, so this is going to convert conditions into life force. Removes 5 condies, a little bit of resolution on top in case you have more condies on you then. It's going to reduce some of that damage. The primary value here is the Condi Cleanse and the Life Force Generation, but it's an Elixir, so it should probably apply Blue. Let's put Resolution, why not? One more utility skill to get to before we get to that Elite. And this is the Stun Break of the kit, Elixir of Ignorance. Stun Break, Resistance. Nothing too crazy, but 25 seconds. We'll see the CDR trait in cooldown reduction trait in the trait line once we get there. So this is potentially a pretty low cooldown, so at the cost of a little bit of Blight, you have access to a pretty reasonable Stun Break option here. And finally, we are going to see, what is the name of the skill again? Elixir of Ambition. Super long tooltip. This applies to every boon in the game, 25 Might. This skill is super powerful, but at the same time, we're looking at 10 stacks of Blight. So this is minus 20% maximum health. And, you know, the durations are things that we're going to be looking to tune. Some of these have been adjusted for competitive modes already. We've seen the strength of abilities that apply a large quantity of boons. And we want to make sure that this skill feels very powerful, but at the same time, to justify the trade-off of Blight. So maybe going a little bit crazy to start it out, but, you know, that's what betas are for. We want to see really how some of these things play out, some of the mechanics that are a little bit less known, like Harbinger Shroud is a very unique take on how Necromancer plays. So it'll be really exciting to see how that actually plays out once everyone gets their hands on it. So let's hop into the traits next. We're going to see a few different potential build lines, I guess, more incentives to build toward more power damage or more condition damage, because the pistol can kind of support both, Harbinger Shroud can kind of support both. We're also going to see a little bit of a potential boon support option for the Harbinger, which is something that Necro hasn't really had access to before. Scourge dipped its toe a little bit into that support role, more on the barrier side, and a little bit of Might, a little bit of Condi Cleanse in there. Harbinger's really leaning into the boon aspect with their elixirs. And so maybe some of you can deduce what one of the traits is going to be based off, boon support, elixirs give boons. I wonder what's going to be there. We'll get to that pretty soon. Well, let's start out with the minor traits. Alchemic Vigor, increased vitality. Why not? This is great. Necro loves vitality, more life force, more health. It's going to give you more access to Harbinger Shroud and a little bit more upfront bulk. So nothing too crazy, but minor trait. We want to make sure it feels solid without being kind of overbearing. And then on the Grandmaster side, we have Corrupted Talent, gain life force when entering Harbinger Shroud. This is going to guarantee that you have a little bit more, as we saw earlier with the life force draining to heal you while you're in combat. You're going to have a little bit of that push-pull of trying to build up enough life force to actually get a solid shroud off. So Corrupted Talent's going to give you a little bit more up front. And what this also allows is you're going to see that you can enter Harbinger Shroud with no life force because this trait is going to give you a little bit up front. So it's going to be a very, very short duration there. But if you do need the emergency to access either Vital Draw or any of the mobility skills, that is always going to be available with Corrupted Talent. So then hopping into the adept traits. Starting on the top, we're going to see a lot of power damage on the top row of traits, a little condition damage on the bottom line, and a lot of boon-related things or elixir-related things in the center line. So Wicked Corruption and Septic Corruption, these both are the Blight payoffs, looking at 1%. I believe this is 0.5% in PvP and World v World because this goes up to 25%. Very, very large number to see in the adept trait slot for a damage multiplier, but this is that damage real payoff for extending your Harbinger Shroud and putting as much blight in yourself as possible. You get a really big payoff here. Septic Corruption with the slight addition of also making Shroud Skill 2 apply poison, so that's up to 6 poison stacks if you hit all 6 of those projectiles. And in the middle here we have Vile Vials, and I pronounced it perfectly on the first time this time. And this is the Elixir cooldown reduction. This one doesn't do anything particular with boons, but this is going to be a little bit more disruptive. Get that slow invulnerability on nearby enemies when you use an elixir. Moving into the master tier of traits, we have Implacable Foe, Stability on Harbinger Shroud. So this Foot in the Grave used to do this for all Necros, doesn't exist anymore. Harbinger seems like a solid spot to give a little bit of stability back on Shroud. Reaper has it on their skill 3, so giving Harbinger access on a trait really kind of enables that more diving, deep melee playstyle of get into Harbinger Shroud, get some stability, dive in, use my abilities, and then potentially get out or just try to survive outside of that. This also gives you a little bit more ferocity based off vitality for that, just a little bit of extra power damage. Down on the bottom, we're going to see pistol cooldown reduction. So this is actually something you could take regardless of build, but there's also the expertise vitality conversion to kind of incentivize condition builds a little bit more, but obviously anyone who's going to be using the pistol might see this as a viable trait, get more life force generation from 2 and 3, more stuns, just more access to those pistol skills. This could definitely slot into any kind of build. And then here in the middle, here is kind of the boon support payoff of the elixirs. Elixirs are now AoE, and a little bit of concentration on top. So this is something we've seen before, like Soul Beast Stance Share, and stuff like that. So looking at, obviously Elixir of Ambition is the huge payoff here. If I come over to these golems that are my good friends, I can give them every boon in the game, and the blight is not shared, so this is me taking on a little bit of blight and giving a giant pile of boons to all of my allies. This is a super powerful trait. Like we see with the Soul Beast Stance Share, we see some duration reductions. This is just 100%. Everyone gets the full amount. This is definitely something that could come down in the future if it turns out to be too powerful, but we really want to see how this plays as we're trying to really enable Necromancer to be kind of this boon support character with Harbinger as something that it hasn't really done a whole lot of before. And I'll take a quick water break before hopping into the Grandmaster traits. All right, so Grandmaster traits. We're going to see kind of a common theme, common mechanical theme between the 3 of them, but they're all going to be, again, more in those power condition or boon duration type, boon support type of builds, rather. Starting with Cascading Corruption. This just gives you a little power up front, and also it's going to create this area effect around you while in Harbinger Shroud that deals power damage and a little bit of cripple. So this is really another reward for staying in Shroud for a long amount of time. You're going to get this continual damage pulses. Excuse me. Continual damage pulses to just get a little bit of extra pressure, reward you for building up this blight, staying in this Shroud for a long time. And we're going to see similar mechanic on the condition damage side of things. A little bit of condition damage up front, and this is going to pulse Torment and Weakness instead of, and I am in combat, unlucky. Yeah, so Torment and Weakness as opposed to a little bit of power damage and cripple. Hop back in here and show the Torment and Weakness. Very exciting. And finally, we're going to have the boon support. Grandmaster trait is going to be a pulsing AoE quickness. So this is for yourself and nearby allies. We've seen a little bit of this on Reaper where they have that pulsing quickness for themselves. This one's a little bit less uptime overall, but it's going to be AoE, and obviously you can spec a lot more into boon duration on this character if this is the type of gameplay that you're looking for. So very, very powerful option. All of these Grandmaster traits just really reward you for being in Shroud for a long time and really pushing that risk-reward side of the Harbinger kit. So that's all we've got to show off for the Harbinger here. Obviously there's a lot more to dive into in terms of like gameplay and rotations and all that good stuff. But we don't want to spoil everything here. We show off all the skills, show off all the traits. Once you guys get your hands on it on Tuesday, you'll be able to deep dive into all that stuff and really start figuring things out. So I believe next we're going to hop over and talk a little bit about the Virtuoso.